So teaching literature through play.
Yeah.
As play.
As
That's what.
Yeah, so they are, I mean, let's, I mean, given that there is a schedule, we'll hold on 7 minutes.
This is the pre-reading.
This is the pre-reading.
Pre-reading.
We're doing the pre-reading, yeah. I'm gonna hit the restroom.
Yeah, that's it.
And then I can dance for a while. With your help.
That's why we're leaving the mic in the middle of the room. That episode will make it done.
That seems to be like a universal fear of mics.
Yep.
Thinking of a couple facts we could use, like, it's not necessarily literature as play, but it's like graphic novels. Seems to kind of have been a real big trend in literature and more of a visual aspect of it rather than play.
Teach German literature through art.
Sounds angry.
Well, no, I mean,
Both the German literature and the German marketing.
well, no. No, I think the substance is that students need to feel first before they care, right?
Mhm.
They need to have some sort of identification point. So that's, yeah. So I often, these are like short, maybe 5-minute games, no more than 20 minutes, and they're just to be like, we're going to prick you, and then we're going to
Move on.
well, yeah, move into the work, but then they don't have like a default feeling like who is greater, right? They know greater, that sort of thing. So
So what level of, like, is this upper level language courses that you're talking about?
yeah, I mean, I'm an associate professor of German, so I teach upper level foreign language and literature and film, and then also so I teach like the survey of German literature. I taught survey of German cultural history to freshmen, and then also grad seminars for doctoral and master's.
So the idea is that when they come to you, they're pretty fluent in German already.
Often, but they often haven't read the works, which is also the same you can say about German. They have not
Yeah,
seen
right.
or
But that's like English.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I remember being at a train station and got to be 15 years ago in Germany and talking to a guy about a series of books I've read, and very, very well-known titles like E.J. Hoffman's Sandman and everything. And at some point he was like, you realize that all these books you mentioned, I have not read a single one of them. I've grown up in this country. It never bothered me to read these.
I think you could say the same about, American students. There's enough American lit that, you get 4 books in your high school experience, then you're like, yep, I'm good.
Yeah, and then when you like actually sit down and read Moby Dick, you're like, it's this eye-opening experience that you can't take back, and
Yeah, in lots of different ways, because you've been set up for it to be an iconic experience. And certain parts of it will just like peel the skin off your face, your eyes, whatever. Not in opposite for that book, but then other parts of it, like the enormous chapters that just go on and on and on. And I mean, even as someone who studies literature, you admire Melville for doing this. Like you don't want to read it.
Right. I can skim that chapter.
Yeah.
Okay, not
Yeah.
about the history of whale water.
Yeah, I mean, so this actually segues into what I wanted to do with the title.
let's do it.
Yeah, so teaching literature as play. So Melville is designing his own rule set for that book. And that's one way to expose how literature is, in fact, always a possibility space, both for I guess we should just talk about the author, although I want to problematize that a little bit in just a moment, both for the author and for the reader. And the reason I was really interested in this is that my main research focus is on the Iliad and the Odyssey, which we have as literature, but which are in a really important sense not literature, because the cliche that I say in every presentation I give is they are fossils of Islam's old living tradition. They we can actually get amazing insights into the rule set within which hundreds of professionalized bards sang them into the form that we have now, where they were eventually written down. And they went through several different iterations of that system, in fact. And the system was clearly always changing. And one of the things I was talking about in my own presentation today was that we do not know at what point the text actually did become there. And there's this amazing moment, which was the center of the presentation, where Socrates, in Plato's Apology, is clearly working in some sense off of a different version of the story of Achilles than the one we have in the Iliad. Now, in one sense, that's not unusual because we all know about myth that you could do the story of Achilles in a ton of different ways, which is how you get Homer on the one hand and then Greek tragedy on the other hand, and then the Iliad a couple hundred years later. But the story, the things that got enshrined in the Iliad and the Odyssey get avoided by everybody else because they became kind of sacrosanct in their own way, which suggests to us that the rule set is, okay, this is the way the story is, and then nobody gets to change it from this point on once it's entered its classic version. But here you have the kind of one of the central figures at the founding of what we think of as Western culture, who is telling a different version, whether because he knew a different version, and even at that point, when we think of literature itself as coming into being, everything was in fact still fluid. You could tell the story a different way, or because of the way that the rule set function let you recast things and recompose things in a way that, and here's just a kind of short circuit the whole thing. This is what I wish we could do in a literature classroom today. We could give the students license, more or less, to retell Moby Dick in their own way, without taking away the fact that Moby Dick's function in the canon is what it is. We say, okay, if you're going to understand how literature works and what literature has meant, what literature can mean, you have to understand it as a thing that came into being through play that you then can play with yourself. And I think that can be true of all sorts of literary texts. But I guess the thing that I've struggled with, really in one way or another through my whole teaching career, is how do you get students there in the classroom? But and let me say that any other way you want to take the title is absolutely fine with me. I just wanted to put the reasoning behind proposing the session out there.
See, I think that's a really good breakdown of kind of the literature narrative or the expectation. And I think you really could go, okay, have the students break down the core components of Moby Dick, and then go, okay, which of these are fixed and which of these are variables? And then go, okay, what happens if you switch this variable, you switch this variable, you switch this one, and you just switch this one? Do we still have Moby Dick? You know, what if it's not? What if it's on an African safari rather than on the boat? Does it still work? You know, can you change the setting? Can you change the monster? Can you change the, you know, the surface level cosmetics of it and still have the same story and have that literary?
Yeah. So what are the rules and what are the mechanics?
Right. And I think you could approach a book or a piece with that. And honestly, I would start with something like super short story, like find something that's like 10 pages.
Yeah.
So you could really, really kind of rip it apart.
Yeah, I mean, the temptation is to go to something that's completely sui generis, like Moby Dick, where the author is clearly, I mean, Ulysses also springs to mind, where the author is inventing their own genre, inventing their own rule set. But I think you're right, if you want to get students there,
You have to start at the tutorial world, because you're basically like, here, try to beat the end boss.
Yeah.
And you're like,
Yeah.
oh, I don't want to touch Melville.
Yeah.
Like that's intimidating, that's scary. You know, give me some Dr. Seuss to start off with, and I can edit that.
Oh, Dr. Susan, such rich world building actually is quite on.
I
would urge you now as an adult to read Happy Birthday to You. just think of it not as this is a story I will read to a child, but this is world building, right? And you are seeing non-Euclidean architecture, very bizarre. I mean this kind of pleasure that explodes beyond. You're supposed to have a lot of fun on your birthday, but it's almost too much fun.
See, I think there's a playful nature in that topic, though, that allows you to.
Okay,
So I want to know,
right?
what
That's true.
does the economy in Kitru actually function? Is my question. Kitru is the land where happy birthday to you. And it is an economy that is completely based on birthdays. And I mean, the amount of resources available for birthdays is absolutely extraordinary. So, yeah, I mean, that, I'm saying absolutely, but that may be a bridge too far. I mean, so do you start with fan fiction? I mean,
I think so.
Yeah, so the answer is yes, absolutely. Fanfic is where it begins because that's where our writers begin, right? Our popular writers, especially the next the last 15 years, are all starting with fanfic. And I know this. There's a friend who's watching my house right now who wrote about 300,000 words last year of Catra and Shira fic, and is now moving on to a novel.
But don't you need to have a background in the literature you're talking about to talk about the fanfic in a
Nope.
particular way? Or
I think it's very
what you're
important.
doing with
well, but I think I think maybe you start with, but I don't. Let's go with Harry Potter fanfic. It's easy.
Yeah.
You start with a Harry Potter book, or even just a chapter of a Harry Potter book, and fan fiction. So you can start. I mean, that maybe gets you talking about rules and mechanics.
Yeah. That's basically, I mean, like one thing that's sort of understated here is the idea of adaptation, right? Where often you've got some older story that you are now adapting, and in the old world, or maybe a less playful world, we would say, okay, here's the original story of Iphigenia, right? And the whole Agamemnon mess, and now here's Goethe's rendition of it, in which they've taken an incredibly violent backstory and turned it into mostly talking about philosophy. And quite quickly, then the students will say, okay, well, why is this person in the 18th century turning this again blood-soaked story into this decision tree and looking at reason versus passion through this new light, but the point being that all of human culture has this fanfic sort of root, but that the fanfic that we now talk about is all connected with franchises, and we think about all of these powerful story universes that we are brought into when we're very young, with no real preparation for that, and that we do have powerful associations with that for our lives, and that then we say, let's dial it back to the 1830s. Well, what are your powerful story universes? The Bible, and this is the Western, say European tradition. You have the Bible and Greco-Roman myths, and maybe some other intertexts. And in fact, a lot of the rebellion we can talk about, say the Romantic or Neo-Romantic periods of the early 1800s, was people talking about nature and writing about nature or decrepit castles as having their own consciousness and not not and not just dwelling on the Bible and this other material. And I think that I mean, my own bias, of course, in my own game design, I have to be I both acknowledge these massive IP universes, and I'm going to create a space for you to rebel against them. But that's difficult, so that then you actually have to meet the students wherever they're at. But then, for me as a German literature professor, I have to the fanfic is when I teach digital media, where I'm you folks are freshmen and you need portfolios by your senior year. So start anywhere. Start freaking anywhere. You want to make music video? Perfect. Start making music video. Look, make mistakes. If you want to write fanfic and then shoot it or make a game out of it, great. Do it. Maybe because then you'll start making the kinds of mistakes you need to make first year that you shouldn't be making senior. That's fun. when I'm in a German context, it's like, okay, I'm navigating, they're using their foreign language, they're reading it without a whole lot of cultural background in sort of the previous fandom, meaning that they don't know the Agamemnon story. So you have to keep that parallel. But what if they feel nothing about the Agamemnon story and they feel nothing about the work? And that's where I say, okay, I'm going to use a short little game to prick your interest in this, and then we're going to go back and say, well, how would you feel? I also have, I was showing Carol these earlier, there's an opera punk game, a large called Encore, for between 30 to 50 people. And it is 11 different operas all jammed into the same space. So here's Ida, all the characters for Ida. Here's all the characters for Carmen. Do need to keep these all together because it's the only talent we have. Here's Nabucco. And again, to do this, you have people in a room and you have posters that say, this opera needs 2 men and 3 women, right? And the key part of this, again, for a literary classroom, is you open it up with the Flying Dutchman, which is this is my character I played, it's Eric, the faithful fiance. You open it up and it's an immediate explanation of the opera in 1 page, which is again a lot of intellectual work already. You will be playing Eric in the opera The Flying Dutchman, capable of love, fate, and devilish deals. Perhaps the Dutchman was once a happy, hard-working captain and sailor, but he called upon Satan to gain fortune on sea, and only now, not only did the devil take the Dutchman's word, he also took his soul, and doomed him to sail the 7 seas forever. And we have all the 4 significant characters mapped out, their deal, and then over the course of this game, you have your sort of 3 acts that so Eric, by Act 1, needs to decide whether or not he's going to reveal his secret engagement to get,
So are these role-playing scenarios?
This is a role-playing scenario.
So within the story of each of the operas?
Yeah, so basically all of these operas are going to have the different 11 operas characters all inhabiting the same space.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's wild because everybody is actually playing a different story. They're inhabiting the same space, but there are different stories happening all at once. And you have to be really loud and over dramatic. So if there's something your character really wants another character to do, you kind of have to just state it and very, very loudly and then amplify it.
So what's the learning objective of this? Is it to get them familiar with the operas? Is it to get them to public speaking? Is it
to turn this into an actual classroom activity? Because right now this is a debauched party learning for and so
which is also a great objective.
Yeah. So right now in its current form, you have about 50 people who come in to again electro-punk band that is playing opera tunes, and they during the interludes there are sort of dances that happen, again very embodied play, and then after those interludes happen, then you're in role play, right? So you are the king and I am, this, but the role play has to be very over the top, right? Which means that like I state exactly what I am feeling right now to you, you will say yes. But I'm worried that, so everything being very transparent so that none of the action is sort of lost.
So it's a transformation of the rules of operatic storytelling.
Exactly.
And these are all romantic operas.
Yes. And this tradition that I come from, which is White Death, is also from the same tradition. So I did a large based on Metropolis 10 years ago, the film, and part of the objective with that was to have the players or the students understand the rules of expressionist theater, right? And so there you have not only is this a set of themes and a plot line and characters, but it's also a specific form of storytelling with its own trajectory. One of the things about expressionist theater is that the characters are put upon by outside forces beyond their control, and they have to express their emotions. So none of the characters have emotions that they themselves come up with. They have an emotion list, and then there are certain triggers, and they have to just go down the list. So sometimes they're anxious, and then suddenly they're suicidal, and then suddenly they're happy, and they don't seem to. And the players are like, I don't seem to control how my character feels, and I'm like, And then the other rule of expressionist theater is that the characters are no different than the backgrounds in which they inhabit, which means that anyone who's not in a scene will then physically play parts of the metropolis, of the city. And it does produce this very sort of weird, again, striated, angsty play, which is over the top, and it feels like a silent film. So,
Yeah, so it's an embodied way of learning the rule set of German expressionism.
exactly. So it's like I've done this with Rundle or Run. I've done this with a number of other famous German films, as well as with German literature as well.
It makes me think of Goethe again and his Iphigenia.
Yes.
And that, I mean, one of the things that happens, and this crosses the line, I think, between adaptation and play.
Right.
Because I think when you're playing within somebody else's rule set, you can end up at the end of it with an adaptation, but that's not what matters in the moment, and that's not what matters for the possibility space of the created act. So I mean, Goethe is imposing the rule set of his own form of tragedy on something that source material that comes from a different kind of tragedy, which in fact was already a play within the story world of Homeric epic, where Iphigenia, I mean, it's interesting because we only have oblique references to Iphigenia in the Iliad and the Odyssey, our first full version of the story. Well, it doesn't. We don't actually get a version of the first story until we get to Euripides.
Right.
But all of that, I mean, that makes her a really interesting character. This would be like an advanced level, maybe not the final boss. Moby Dick is the final boss, but an advanced level of figuring out how literature works as play would be thinking about how various different tragedians. I don't know. I don't think Racine has an Iphigenia, but how differently how differently you can tell that story. I mean, Euripides, well, I mean, I'm thinking stuff within my own bailiwick, where you have one version, Iphigenia's original Iphigenia of Alice, sorry, Euripides' original Iphigenia of Alice, and then somebody else comes along and changes the ending. And we can tell where they changed the ending, and we can talk about why they would have wanted to change the rule set, because the original one would have been very pessimistic about war.
I think you have to take it and look back at what you want the learning objective to be.
Yeah.
Because that's what you're going to mess with as far as like the game and then playing the mechanics. Because sometimes you can be too close to content where you don't want, because that's sacrilege. Like that's what if you spend 8 years studying, you can't do. Like that's painful. That's hard. So a lot of times
What is sacrilege?
What's that?
What is that?
Changing anything.
Oh, no, that's the point.
Right, but sometimes, so when I'm working with faculty, a lot of times they're so close to the content that the idea of making any part of that play, you're like, that's my profession. My profession is to know absolutely everything as is. And so as soon as you talk about like, what would happen if the student changed the ending of Moby Dick? You go like, I would fail them. Like that would be horrible and awful. And you go, that's where you have to introduce kind of more about that play mindset.
Is it more important that they remember what happened to every character in Moby Dick, or that they know the rules of Moby Dick?
Yeah.
At the end.
Or like that you register that they felt things about Moby Dick,
Right.
and are able to express those clearly. You know,
Right, that's successful.
I mean, I have a game studies class where I have them like respond with weekly journals about specific games, right? And the thing I look for in that is not that they've written clearly or anything. It really is evidence, textual evidence that they not only played the game but had sort of its emotion system work on, right? Where you can tell the difference between someone being like, Undertale is a queer RPG where you don't kill the monsters. That's somebody who probably didn't play Undertale. The person who's raging about Sans or who has strong feelings about or at least is like I think that this is a commentary about tyranny, and then involves this kind of wild argument using the various characters. You can actually evaluate that. It's like yes, like what my learning objective is engagement. and during the pandemic, that is the number one thing. Is absolutely, no matter whether or not they've done the reading, have they engaged with the material, right? Yeah, whether or not if they played the game, have they really,
Experienced it.
Yeah, one of the primary activities in my courses these days is annotation, where they get a Google Doc of the reading, and then as a class, they annotate it together. I would so much rather they made 10 good annotations on 1,000 words of that than that they read the whole 30,000.
So really, what we're talking about is you have to know the rules in order to bring them.
Mhm.
Right?
Yep.
So,
Absolutely.
and yeah, that's what it comes down to is you'd rather have them engage deeply with the specific aspects of it more than just simply know a little bit.
Yeah, because knowing that it produces engagement. That is what engagement is. It is feeling like like it is. And I've got my personal idiosyncratic definition of immersion, which is not, it involves letting the rest of the world go away, which is the experience of immersion. But it's where you actually identify with the rule set that you engage with, that it comes into you, and I mean, it's best when it's embodied. I mean, only there is some way to actually embody the act of reading.
So do you think
When
students-
sometimes we do, sometimes we feel it, but
Do you think students could create that rule set, or is that above? Because I think of
Absolutely.
You think so?
This is how I taught literature for many years, like this, where I say, here's my game for teaching the sorrows of young literature. What's your game? Because the game that I've evolved is unfair. It more or less just diagrams the novel for them. And then I have another student, Sarah Baker, who made a response game in which it's even simpler, where you just separate the room into Lottes, Goethes, and Werners, and then every Lotte and every Werner have to get together into a couple, and then every Werther has to then latch onto them as this weird guy who's like creeping on them off in the corner. And within 5 minutes, we now have a bunch of physical manifestations of the novel. Right, and then I say, okay, that's Sarah's version, and in my version, it's kind of like, this guy talking aloud as where I offer up these different sort of role-playing vignettes. Again, like 5 minutes, like not that much time. And then, what's their response? How do they do it? And I've had students come up with like games where they're like, okay, we'll do a question and answer about the novel, and every time,
Trivia.
they go straight Trivial Pursuit. Every time I get an answer correct, I do 5 hit points of damage on the professor. That's okay. you think about all of the implications of the rule set and what that means again philosophically. You think, huh. I guess that may be your view of college, right? But the students will work through that, and also they begin to realize, oh, I haven't played enough games to say what I need to say. That's where I've got them. That's it. All right. So there are games out there that can do what we want, but they all have their own quirks, problems, whatever. And the only way you can figure those out is by actually playing them, running them, or engaging with them, and then they're my 100%. I see game design as a conversation. It's not nothing fixed. It's just
I'm kind of struggling with the same thing that you just were, is that I have a lot of students that come in and they play Trivial Pursuit, Scrabble, Monopoly, and they don't even know different game mechanics, LARPing, role-playing, any of the mechanics around that. So I think we need to try and break down the literature itself into core components and then have the discussion of what does that look like as a mechanic, how can we modify it?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great discussion to have, and partially then it's like, okay, well, how much game design speak you introduce it?
Yeah, because that's, as the instructor, I think you're introducing the game design, but as a class, you're dissecting the literature as the different pieces and parts, and to think about what you can and what you can't. What is that story arc that has to stay the same, or are we allowing full modification of everything?
Well, there are two areas where you can offer very easy models. One is from indie games, which is the Fruitful Void, coined by Vincent Baker, and that is to say, you look for the thing that the text is about, but never says. And that can start a whole conversation, right? Okay, you've read these 10 pages. What is this about? The thing that's not said. And of course, different students will have different interpretations, right? That's not a right answer. But oftentimes, there is a play world or rule set from the author, right? And I'm like, okay, how do you make a game that then does that same thing? That is because your game does the same thing, right? Where it's actually about breaking or revisiting or reimagining the rules rather than following them, but you have to follow them in order to get them. The second dimension would be Greg Kostikian's uncertainty in games, which has 11 different dimensions of uncertainty, everything from randomness, which is a very obvious one, to schedule uncertainty, which is I don't know when the developer will next update this thing. But Smash Brothers folks are real keen on that. Overwatch, also very keen, right? And you begin to look at literature differently also through that lens. Okay, so what's a schedule uncertainty example in literature? Will George R.R. Martin finally write that last book? You begin to think that that there are not only rule systems within the works themselves, but within the whole industry, and that there is this game that's being played with the audiences. It's not nice. It's often a nice game, but then you can sort of isolate specific things within both games and literature in this kind of agnostic system and say, why did this event happen? Is this an event that happened because the author wanted to punish this character? Would you create in your game system, would you want to punish the player? Or would you want to say this will happen so you won't have to, there won't be a consequence? So we're not getting, but then you're going to have to decide how does your character feel about that, right? And so you begin to use these different dimensions as ways of calibrating what you do and don't want to talk about with your game, and then you shut out everything else that doesn't matter. Which also means that we should have our students design smaller games, like situations, like one scene from a book or one dialogue, rather than the whole book. Because for me, you can get into the rules system of the book, but then it runs exactly what Andrew was talking about, which is you're running into, they're going to do Monopoly the book. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Book the Monopoly.
Things that I've done, I've had students actually build their own fictional worlds with complete unique genres, cool. And then they had to incorporate specific characters as those characters are. You can't change any of the characteristics of the history or the background other than to update it to everyone fit.
So grab this character, put it
How
in
do
this
these characters, right,
Yeah, so that character is a rule.
right,
Yep,
right,
exactly.
And I've done it with thematics too, how these are thematics of how does Margaret Atwood impact and influence the society that you built.
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing that occurred to me about Moby Dick and those sections of Moby Dick, like the sections about whales, that goes back to stuff that's there in Homer. So that's a rule that he's taking from elsewhere, that the act of kind of stepping away from the narrative, and also the famous second book of the Iliad, where you have the catalog ships.
It's the lit review. It's to make sure you get there's some credibility.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's there are rules attached to that too.
One of the things that I keep coming back to is, and I kind of regularly draw on when I'm developing my own courses, is educational literature about contrasting cases and the importance of being able to tune perception. So I'm thinking about what you said, Kevin, regarding the students coming into the classroom, and Andrew, you were saying this too, not having played a lot of games. That actually creates a big problem, because it's not just that they haven't played a lot of games. Usually they haven't engaged with a lot of media. They just don't have media literacy skills. And one of the ways that I try to solve that is finding those little moments where there are a couple of really simple contrasting cases where I can point them to all 3 or 4 and say, what is similar, what is different? And what do you think is important about those similarities and differences? And then having them figure out, okay, what do I do to create something that creates Roger and Mark and I and others have talked about this before, a one-to-one relationship between whatever the learning objective is associated with that piece of media and whatever the play objective would be for the game. So how do you actualize the thing that you want this person to understand? And usually getting them to go through that process to figure out what does it mean to embody a character, or what does it mean to demonstrate a skill, et cetera, ends up being really productive because it forces them to think through, how do I do all of my media consumption in this, even if you're using this very narrow slice of media to be able to make that those contrasts. So I say that esports tends to be one where a lot of students will play like Overwatch, but they'll only play Overwatch, or they'll only play League of Legends. And this is even with game design students, like getting them to understand, no, you can't just play League of Legends. You have to have a broader library that you're experienced with, or the games you create are going to be really problematic for the same reason that if you're a writer, writing Moby Dick or Mark Atwood or whoever, like that you're going to run into this problem where you can't convey theme or ideas in a subtle way that actually engages the reader. It's just going to be ham-fisted the entire time.
To me, League is still Warcraft. Yeah, right. And like there is something to be said of being like, well, there's this rule system that you have taken that now you accept as sacrosanct because of your own background in the game. You see, and you have to like question those core premises. I was thinking about one of those, which was how to teach 18th and 19th century drama. We just look at all of the, we've got about 10 different cast, I know the German Personenregister, but it's like what's the English?
Dramatis persona.
Yeah, right, Dramatis persona, right? So you just look at those from the 18th century to the 20th century. And I first we do this to be like, here's what modernism did, right? Where modernism says here's a man and a woman and a dog, and that's your dramatis personae for this particular theater piece. But in the 1760s, the rules were the king, even though the king only appears in one scene in this play, the king is on top because this dramatis personae reflects the power relations of the society. So it's one way I can very easily say, okay. Let's just look at this very short piece of text that I know you didn't need to read so much of, but now we can already begin to, sort the characters, and then the characters the students have to begin to guess, well, what is the station of this character in society? Like, how do I respond with the correct answer for the professor, right? in his context? But then the correct answer is, of course, can they read power in fiction? And that's a really low bar, right? Who gets listed first? And
So, one of the things I think you can do is you take all the literary elements and you make a card on it. And then you deal out the cards to the students and go, make that story. And this is what we did for game design. So I've got a bunch of mechanics, goals, iterations, just different game design elements, because I got sick of students making Nazi zombie mob. And you would, every single class, every single time you're getting these bad games. And I go, okay, I've got to provide some structure.
Right.
I've got to provide something that gives them some, and they get these cards, they go, I don't know what that is. And I go, well, you've got the internet, you've got a touch, you've got a class. Figure it out.
We need these rules to talk. Where Steve and I have to do a game design element of a program. It's a language learning program for Japanese and Korean that we got a big grant for at UConn, and they decided they wanted to. Is this available?
Yeah, so it's on Amazon.
Oh, great. Okay. They decided that they were going to do it about games without having any involvement from anybody who does games. And so thankfully, it was happening in my department, Literatures, Cultures, and Languages, and they thought to consult me because I do games. And I said, oh no. so I finally, I roped Steve into it, and the inaugural thing is going to be this summer, and I think it's going to be fine, Steve, because what I basically had my chair do was say, okay, here are 3 hours, and you can do whatever you want with those 3 hours if you get it. about games. That's what matters, and we're really just trying to get them to a point where they're getting comprehensible input, which is the key to language acquisition.
You have the metagame? By Eric
Yeah,
Zimmer?
yeah.
Yeah, so that's the other,
Right,
that's the
but
one I use.
They want these students to be designing games,
Yeah.
and so Steve and my initial reaction was, no.
So these are actually, so we worked with, Jeffrey Weston. He wrote the game mechanics. It's a textbook called like game mechanics. And that's all it is every single one of these mechanics are like a page in his book that tells you exactly what.
I've read that, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so we started working with him, and then we got Taylor and Francis, and they're like, we've never made a card game before, and we're like, well, can we use all the art and the game mechanics from this textbook? And they're like, yeah. And we're like, sweet, because we just want to be able to shuffle up the book and deal it out.
Yeah.
And that's really all it is. It's just, we added themes on the bottom. So, because again, we didn't want the Nazi zombies. And so they're like, okay, you have to pick out one of these themes. You have to pick out one out of these mechanics. You have to pick out something here. And we've had a really good time kind of running this, having people have to make a game with Valhalla. And you go, they're bad games, but there's something that's completely unique that they haven't done before, and it gets that experience.
They can iterate them as well.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
I mean, again, my response is the nano game form. So it's hashtag feminism, which the project I was part of, use the Morningstar's shout out launch was mentioned, but those nano games take less than an hour to play. And you know, they are about abortion, they're about like going to your college reunion, they are about
Everything and anything.
like literally any topic. But if the students have played like 2 or 3 games from that collection, and then you ask them to make a 4th game,
It's exactly.
they begin to get it, right. And it's like, you know, a game is just a couple of rules that then say something. And that once they have that idea, not Overwatch or Skyrim, then suddenly it's something manageable and they can do it. And they create a bad game that then still says something. That's like, I guess, the objective. Yeah, that's always my learning objective. Can you make a thing that says something?
Have you tried pairing this with something like the story engine to get them to do a combination of both the narrative design shuffling as well as the mechanics?
I haven't. So I swung real far. So I did a lot of like really big narrative stuff. And now that I swung back, and this was like super heavy mechanics. And I think I need to get back to like somewhere in the
No,
middle.
I think they would pair really nicely, actually, because you would go and you could force an overarching narrative onto these mechanics and get them to really think about what are the dynamics of the various game systems and how do you get them to self-reinforce. And
See, I need a master's program. Because right now this is a 100 level board game design.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So it's like super, right, not Monopoly, please, thank you. Whereas we're starting to try and introduce that, a master's in digital instruction and design, which one of those is a master's level game-based learning, which again, now you can have that bigger discussion of people that have successfully succeeded the bachelor's gauntlet and can have that bigger discussion.
Would that be tailored to people going into game design, or would it be tailored to kind of a broader audience?
So ideally, it's game design who don't want to be full-time game designers, and educators who don't necessarily want to be in the classroom. So we've got kind of this master's degree that's trying to merge those 2 undergrads together with a couple of classes that are, you know, if you come up from like architecture, you're like, okay, you need to know a little bit about education. You need to know a little bit about game design. And that kind of.
Now, would you be able to take something like this in the narrative part that you were talking about and turn it around and apply it to a piece of literature to get them to do an interpretive thing rather than a creation thing?
Yep.
Because I think that that's where we kind of need to start if we are using play or.
I think you make the students make the cards. So you identify the different core components of this. You shuffle them up, and then you draw one of them that you need to change. Or you assign one to change for someone else. So like, how much do you break the story if you remove the protagonist? Or, you know, like you had that core single mechanic element that you make them modify.
I'm thinking from the level of like just getting them to interpret the literature to start off with, or they're trying to look at the the structure of the whole world or the creation of, Rebecca's game, but just coming to understand that particular.
I think you may be putting the cart before the horse.
thing.
Well, yeah, no, I think you want to start by breaking it down mechanically, because that's the easiest thing to approach. These are the things that happen in the story. These are, and the inevitability of the plot goes like this. Why does this happen? What's the mechanic that makes this person die, for example, or lets this person win? And then you can, by maybe comparing them with narratives that everybody has, basic movies, you say, okay, so we're going to say that this is the basic power fantasy of good guy gets rewarded. And you then you can add in various things like this is this main character. You can combine them in different ways. And I think it's then that you can say, okay, so we just made a very different version of that story. How does that change the meaning?
See, I think you could make a really cool game that was, here's all the different, like the power fantasy, and have like 4 or 5 cards that was like, male lead, then, and have these 5 cards, and you put them down and you go, okay, everybody, how many movies can you think of? How many books can you think of that follow this? And then almost have it like a, what is that, like a word? No, the one where you like, how many different words can you spell out of this set? So it's how many different literature titles can you think of that follow these 5 core elements? And then same thing, have everyone do different elements and different.
Yeah, and then and you can get to what generally goes by the name of meaning or literary theme by saying, okay, if these 2 films or these 2 stories are constructed in such similar ways, what different meanings do they have, if any, and why? Or do they just basically mean the same thing? Is there some important symbol in one of them that isn't there?
What did they add? Was there value added in this retelling, or was it just basically now it's in?
Yeah, and where did it come from? Did it come from the rule set? Did it come from a new mechanic that got added in, or is there something that kind of escapes that designation that kind of goes by the name content? I tend to think that the content is just another kind of mechanic, but.
Right. Well, I mean, I do that with the game studies course where we do Hamlet's hit points that are credited by Robin D. Laws, and basically it does the whole story beat analysis of Hamlet, right? And like, is this a procedural beat which advances the plot, or is it a gratification beat? Like, that's cool that character got killed, or is a bring down like that author just did that thing to make me feel bad. And the cool thing about Hamlet, or it was like Hamlet, Casablanca, and Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? And or no, maybe I'm misremembering.
What was the hero's journey? That's all of them.
No, but it's anti-hero's journey. First of all, you look at you got that classic like the narrative arc chart, or overlapping now with the other group. But you have that classic narrative arc chart which like has the climax up here and the denouement or whatever. And they're like, that's total nonsense. Most narrative is just about inflicting pain on the characters. Then there's a minor uptick at the end. Yeah, but mostly it's just pain. Okay, it's fine.
When did the German literature?
Right. No, this is analysis of Casablanca and Hamlet, right? And I'm trying to remember what the third one in there was, but he wrote the book to kind of illustrate the kind of media analysis you need to do to be a good game master. And one of the fruitful voids or the hidden bits of that lesson is you say, oh, these aren't just one beat. The Hamlet is not just about the plot, right? And so they can be like, this seems to be a moment where the plot is advancing, but also this character is suicidal, and they seem like they're going to kill themselves. And also, it seems like they're making a larger commentary about a meta-level commentary for you as the audience, and that's where we start, right? We're like, what is the function of this scene within this larger work that is as a rule system, especially with the explicit purpose of eliciting audience emotion. And there you have sort of a weird idealized like recipient or reader but like that's the problem with the method, and we can accept that, but you can still be like, okay, what is the point of this scene? And you know, especially if you're graphing it on like plot level, character, emotion, and meta commentary. Those are sort of like the four rubrics. Then you can begin to reshuffle it. Now, my game design idea is to be like, you map a story and you really get all those complex beats, and then you just remove the story and then you ask the students to write those beats. And then you say, or did you make an adaptation of Hamlet? Right? Did you what you've taken 10 story beats, right? So this is again like, you know, this is a bring down beat that advances the plot line. You know, Polonius is murdered, right? So that then you've got that moment. And then you just remove the Polonius, and then you just have a bring down beat that advances the plot line. What would you write from there? You know, and it's sort of like, it's alienating for the students, but I would love to see it actually seen as like a writing exercise. You know, can you follow these instructions? And to some degree, it also reminds me of how alienating the Sid Field, you know, writing system is, where there is this hero's journey, but the hero's journey is like the last thing that's interesting. In fact, it's so uninteresting as to drive me away from movies. Whereas I prefer watching something like Japanese Story, where, you know, the protagonists are having a lovely time and it's a romantic comedy, and then the guy jumps into the shallow end of a pool and dies, and then the other half of the movie is just them dealing with the funeral.
See, I like this idea that you're like Shakespeare's copywriter.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden tonight, this actor can't go. We need a new scene right here
That's
tonight.
exactly it.
Yeah.
Yes, that's it. That's it. Yes, and like that's the
Yep.
stuff, because then it's like urgently we need
Right,
this
right.
thing.
And you go, it doesn't have to be good. This character just died. Like, I'm sorry, he, you know, King's Guard stabbed him, whatever, I don't care. I caught the plague, or my time is probably way off somewhere at the start of it. But
Yeah, and then what happens to the work? That's like probably the easiest way to do it, which is look at this work as if it were a series of events in a possibility phase.
I think you can do that with an analysis, like you were saying, you know, this is what happened in episode 1, this is what happened in episode 2, this is what happened in episode 3. Okay, this is what we planned in episode 2, but we can't do it because of plot, story, whatever. And you go, we need to swap out these core elements. So they have to understand the elements. They have to understand what was currently there. They have to understand kind of the insignificance of it.
Right.
And go, you're in charge of film. And I think that's a perfect approachable thing, because I go, nothing really happened in this.
And so, I mean, imagine Moby Dick and you say, we just got a cease and desist from Disney. We can't use whales because of
Right.
Pinocchio.
Right. And so all of a sudden, and honestly, just that absurd, because there's no danger in approaching that.
You know, in 2014 they did the big Harry Potter LARP, you know, College of Wizardry, and of course Warner Brothers did send the cease and desist. And so for me, as a humanities person, I'm like, and now we get to watch what happens when people suddenly have to take the same universe. College of Wizardry still happens, and they have to make their own, but like sort of samey. What do they keep? What happened was the polls made it all about necromancy. So now actually is this sprawling like necromancy, anti-necromancy werewolf plot thing.
Well, and this is in fact where 50 Shades of Grey came from.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Okay, I missed that hop somewhere.
Richard Gray was Twilight fan.
Oh, okay. Now I'm back to this, because I didn't make that jump. But
So Jason Morningstar, and the only reason why
I go upstairs.
the only reason why I talk about LARP all the time is I'm a LARPer, so forgive me. But then Jason Morningstar did a LARP called The Dream, which is actually based off of a 1911 silent film called The Dream that you can look up on YouTube. And one of the key thing that's interesting about it is, of course, like all the affairs and weird stuff that's happening on the set. So in the LARP, you as players actually have to make the film. So you're basically, you know, making a sleeved version of your own take, as it were, and I can show you that if you want to at some point, but the point being that there's actually inherent conflict in the design between the actors who have all this weird drama, like actual, and of course the players playing the actors are playing actors, but also like, you know, having to play the characters, as well as the director and the staff are all playing their characters, but they, as players, actually have to make the damn film, which is almost impossible. That actually like the design breaks and under that script. I've written about this, but the other thing that's interesting is just asking the students to recreate the system of the dream, and we had to be like, okay, how do we shoot this so that we're authentic to the characters in the script, but that there's some weird remainder of that chemistry that's off screen that we're also still totally inventing, still also, taking place in this silent film. And that was way stressful, but I'd love to do it again. It's one of those things where it's like, I'd love to replay this and see if I can hack the design to do a little more of what it's supposed to do, but then at the same time, having, a finished creative work that you've produced that also demonstrates that you understand how this thing works and also the nuances of it. I mean, that's the beauty of that. And especially if you're adapting a work that no one cares about. I think it's really important. Just, you
Like
got
I said, it's gotta be that middle scene. You don't want, a big intro, or at least not at the first, maybe give them that responsibility.
yeah, right.
later in the semester.
Yeah, but you're right. You just chunk it into it as a small bit and say, can we do that? And then you can get into the system of the work. But it's almost also like modeling for the students, like, oh no, what we think is a light too bright for us to do the whole thing. We have to do a small chunk and see if we can do that well.
Well, I think it lets them systematically take it apart.
Yeah.
Which is, honestly, I think the whole goal.
That is,
Is you want them to be able to approach a literature work and go, what happened there?
Yeah.
And be able to go, yeah, you really could swap that out with filler, as long as it, you don't.
Yeah, and then, you can add layers there, because my literature classroom is all about historical context, and cultural context more than
See, I think
historical.
you could give everyone a secret objective with that.
Yeah, oh, that's great.
Because then you're like, okay, you're really passionate about.
No, if you think about Athens, and I know you've done the Athens in the past, if you think about Athens in 399 BCE, people who are part of the people who are against Socrates, people who are part of the who are for Socrates, what do you do with a comedy of Aristophanes that comes out at around the same time if you want to skew it, if you want to attract this?
You want to try and just nudge it this way, subtle,
Yeah.
but try and theme this,
Yeah.
try and kill off this person or this mindset, or I think
Because
because
one of those secret missions that are built into some of the project, games where the characters have their secret.
Yeah, so this is a Greek Civ teaching game where each of the characters, the player characters, has basically a different job.
I love it.
Each of which embodies a trend, most notably like the sophist versus the
Yeah.
philosopher.
It's one of the easiest tricks in large situations. Like, you are the person who represents this idea or this ideology. But then like, that's what writers do. Like,
Right.
we do this all the time.
That obvious? Yes, that obvious.
It's like, you cannot read Tolstoy without this precise.
Yeah, and that's a great way also of teaching obliquely how mechanics embody ideology.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and even, coming up with some sort of basic economy that then your character's ideological bent, directly affects,
Mhm.
right? So, yeah.
You can get funding for your next literature work if you work in The King's Nephew.
Yeah.
Oh, all right, that's totally going to happen, and we're going to attend his wedding. That scene.
Yeah, so and when you're producing a Greek tragedy or a comedy, you have to put on a little show before the festival even gets started and gets rehearsing, so the city will give you a chorus. And when you get a chorus, you get to start producing your tragedy, your comedy.
Well, the more that the students understand about the business, they already understand that everything has to make money, but I'm like, you don't understand the beginning of it. This thing that we call culture only runs on this kind of
Yeah.
shysterism, and that is that, especially when we move into like modern video games. I'm like, I don't want to get this subscription pass or something like that. I'm like, let me tell you about paying $20 to Pac-Man machine. That I don't know still. I still don't own those Pac-Man machines. I put quarters in.
One of the reacting to the past scenarios is the art of Paris.
Oh yeah, I know all the RTTV stuff.
Yeah. But it's, I really like the capitalistic side of that, is that at that final show, you have to find the patrons. And you go, someone can still maintain their artistic integrity and just die broke.
I contrast that with by the same authors as Encore, a game called Summer Bomb, which has all of the artists are in Montmartre at the same time, and they are all communicating to each other through art. And the RTTP was notably way more cynical about that. I love the contrast of because they're both talking about the exact same period, exact same sort of sets of people, but one is saying, "Ah, it was so beautiful," and the other, and again, we're talking about mechanics and ideology. The other is saying,
People
"Yeah,
with tuberculosis.
yep, yep." They're dying of disease and
How about opium dens? All right, we solved it.
Yeah, I feel like it.
I think we're going to say goodbye for WebEx. And
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
That was really great.
Fun discussion.
Yeah.